Another component of mapping current workflows and processes prior to starting to look for improvements, which was step 5, is to collect forms and reports and analyze the data contained in them. Some organizations even go a step further to map existing data, either in paper or EHRs, to required data for supporting documentation templates, such as for use in clinical decision support and for quality reporting purposes. Looking at the data, how it is collected, be it forms, paper forms, or computer templates, and the uses of data information and knowledge generated is especially important when automation is being introduced or optimized, which we're experiencing now a lot of. But it is also important for the transition to value-based care, where business and clinical intelligence, ideally at the point of care, but also readily available and at least near real time for all who can act upon such information, is very important. The example supplied here is about a hospital where nurses complained about how long it took to complete nursing admission assessments, especially after the process, at least to some extent, was automated. In fact, they were so frustrated they wanted to eliminate use of the automated forms. Instead, wisely, the hospital pulled together a team to conduct workflow and process improvement. It was discovered that the nursing admission assessments on 9 paper forms took 90 minutes on average, with the two automated forms taking 75 minutes to complete. Is there any wonder the nurses said get rid of the computer? Once a forms inventory was compiled, it was obvious that many of the forms contained much of the same information. Interestingly, the first question of the nurses was, can data be entered once and populate all the other forms? This was an interesting question because, yes, data should be entered once and reused where appropriate. Certainly 11 different forms, be they paper and or automated, should not be needed. After all data were mapped, one template in the EHR took less than half the time to complete the 11 different forms in total. In another example, a hospital believed that too many reports were being generated, whether on paper or via the computer, and decided to study how these could be reduced. They used a similar spreadsheet process as to the nursing assessment forms and teams to review the reports, but found it difficult to get people to commit to not getting their reports. So instead, they took the drastic measure of not distributing or making available via the computer any reports for a period of 1 month, although they did run all the reports to supply them if necessary. They tallied all the calls that sought reports and which reports were requested. At the end of that month's time, they identified that 62% of the reports were not requested at all, and of those requested, less than half were from people who were on the normal distribution list. They reinstated the desired reports for the specific requesters and went another month not delivering the remaining reports, just as a double check. Only a few persons requested the reports during the second month. Finally, they took all reports not requested at all and ran them for the conclusion of the year, but did not distribute them. Only a few of these were requested at year's end. At the conclusion of the evaluation process, they were able to reduce the number of reports being run, and they believed that those not requesting reports were left with some freed up time. So there are many uses for obtaining baseline data in addition to understanding a current workflow. Step 5 on obtaining baseline data as part of the current workflow process mapping also includes identifying productivity errors. Obtaining baseline data during process mapping is performed by some but not all organizations. But those who want to monitor results against goals, especially for value-based care, should consider obtaining baseline data during current process mapping to ensure that as-is data are collected. The flow process chart as illustrated in this example is well suited for this purpose because it provides columns to indicate average time, the T column, it takes to complete each task, how many units, the U column, are typically performed, and any references to supplement documents, the question mark column. Baseline data may be collected through formal stopwatch time studies, or more commonly in healthcare through estimating and sampling. Once baseline data are collected, they can be analyzed and associated values can be achieved. In this example, a nurse's time managing the prescription renewal process in a small clinic is studied. Other persons involved in the process can be evaluated as well, but this one just looked at the nurse. And again, nurse is it RN, etc. But anyway, it was concluded that 10 renewal calls were received per hour on average, and it takes an average of 3 minutes to perform all the tasks. At this rate, the nurse spends 30 minutes per hour, or 50% of time, on this process. The nurse's salary and benefits, estimated to be approximately $50,000 per year, can be used to calculate the value, which in this case is half or $25,000. This example highlights the importance of appreciating value versus direct cost savings. Even if much of the process will be automated, some nurse time will continue to be associated with some of the steps. Furthermore, the nurse will now be freed to perform other professional duties that contribute further value to the clinic. And it is noted that some processes consume supplies, but in this process would be negligible or non-existent. Capturing error data is also possible as part of baseline data collection. In this example, the clinic decided that medication errors of some form occurred with about 2% of all renewals, each resulting in an additional office visit for the patient. The clinic decided the average value of a visit was $100 and that there were approximately 20 visits per day, resulting in about 5,300 visits per year. Small practice. That would mean 106 visits were attributable to a medication error during the renewal process, with the total value being $10,600. Note that the value of this error, whether calculated precisely or estimated, depends on how the clinic is reimbursed. In fee-for-service, the clinic may make money from extra visits, although hopefully no one intentionally makes errors to increase revenue. In value-based care, however, additional visits will be a loss to the clinic, puts them at risk. The total cost then of processing prescription renewals, including the nurse time and the errors, is $35,600. Even if the time and error rate could be cut only in half, there is significant cost savings for a small clinic. Okay, we are now finally ready to identify problems needing improvement. It's taken us a while to get here, but we should now have a very complete, accurate, comprehensive as-is map to base our thought process on. The list of areas for improvement opportunities presented here should get any organization started. These might include, for example, looking for bottlenecks, communication breakdowns, sources of delay, repetitive tasks, duplication, rework due to errors, role ambiguity, unnecessary duplications, unnecessary steps, long cycle time, lack of adherence to standards, lack of needed information to perform process, and lack of quality controls and/or inspections. It should be remembered, however, that not every potential problem is a real problem. In some cases, for example, duplication can be a clinical best practice. In addition to finding problems, finding control points or even their absence where they are needed is a very important part of analyzing current processes. It's easier in general to look at a process and say what's wrong than to say what's missing. Control points are not confined to clinical processes. As we make the transition to value-based care, there will likely be many more workflow challenges than exist within our own four walls, and so we'll have to look outside of our walls also. Comparing workflows and processes across individuals, nursing units, specialty areas, sites, and even organizations is also important, not only to achieve better standardization and economies of scale, but potentially to find better ways being performed elsewhere that can be incorporated into your own or potentially adopted by all. Isn't that what workflow interoperability is all about? Now let's take a look at some examples to brainstorm how we might improve. And the first example is a clinic, and we're using, in this case, a swim lane chart. Again, just to show you how different charts have different properties that you might want to consider. The example, as I said, is in a clinic with a medical assistant, MA this time, taking a patient's vital signs when rooming a patient. And so that's the top or the first lane in our swim lane. MA, room a chart, take vital signs, record vital signs in chart, get reason for visit, instruct patient. And then there's a delay. And there's really no further steps for that MA. The next lane is the MD. The MD greets the patient, checks ID, takes vital signs, records vital signs in chart, get reason for visit, record reason for visit in chart, examines the patient, writes RX. There's a delay. Maybe there's a call about a formulary, possibly if there's an issue, and then records chart notes, which could be delayed significantly, or if it's done with an EHR, should be done simultaneously. But in this case, it looks like it's done later. Even if it's a paper, even if it's an electronic health record, many times physicians are delaying their documentation. But we're going to focus here on the difference between what the MA does and what the MD does. And the first thing that should pop out at us is take vital signs, record vital signs in chart, and get reason for visit, which are seemingly duplicated. As such, we look at, okay, what's going on here? And what we actually find is that the current or as is map is not really complete enough for us to make some valid assumptions about potential opportunities for improvement. And there are some additional issues presenting themselves as well. In this case, the MA actually takes temperature, pulse, and respiration, TPR, as well as a blood pressure reading as the vital signs previously documented. But by parsing this out, we can now see what's going on a little bit better. When the MD sees the patient and takes a second blood pressure reading. Now, as I said, there seems to be something quirky going on here. And the first thing that I noted was there's nothing wrong with taking a second blood pressure reading, but usually there's a reason for this. Sometimes the patient has a high reading the first time, then comes down to where there's a normal reading a little bit later. If the MD knows this patient and knows this happens frequently, it's a good choice to take a second reading. Another reason might be that the MD is a cardiologist and wants to take special care and even potentially takes a third reading at the conclusion of a visit. If there is a valid reason for more than one blood pressure reading, this should be documented in a decision symbol. However, I do want to note that the swim lane charts, while great at showing who does what and when, and can illustrate delays using a clock symbol and spacing, as we see here, are not as good as systems flowchart in showing decision flow. But still they could. We could insert a diamond shape and show how decisions are made across the lanes. Let's go on though, because there's more to the story. Note that the MA takes first blood pressure and records, but it does not state where the MA records the reading. In fact, it was learned after much questioning, clued in by the fact that the reason for visit did not appear to be documented at all by the MA, that the MA records the TPR in the chart, but records the first blood pressure reading on a sticky note, and also records the patient's reason for visit on a sticky note, neither of which are ever recorded in the patient's chart. But the MD's second blood pressure reading is recorded in the chart, though not identified here, and also the reason for visit is documented in the chart as identified. What actually was happening here was that the MD did not trust the MA's blood pressure reading and did not always agree with the reason for visit identified by the patient to the MA, because it often was not a reason that did not reflect the full scope of the visit, and hence was inconsistent with the CPT code the MD used for billing the visit. Improvements recommended then included additional training for the MA to take accurate blood pressure readings, in which case a second reading could or should be done when clinically applicable. The reason for visit, however, was another matter. The MA needs that information to determine if the patient should disrobe or not. But there is really no reason for this sticky note if the MD is going to ask the patient a second time. Or maybe there could be additional training on that as well.